What's going on, everybody? My name is Alex Wilson. I have my co-host beside me, Anthony Rivardo from Fireside Giants and Empire Sports Media Production. You're listening to the Fireside Giants podcast. If you're a diehard Giants fan, you've come to the right place. Daily episodes, interviews, draft content, and so much more. Make sure to drop a like and a subscription below on YouTube. And don't forget to leave a comment. We love to engage with everybody. Today's episode, we're going to take a look at none other than edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeaux. What is going on with him? He has his pro day coming up, and the Giants are clearly intrigued, and we'll tell you why. Also, I want to take a look at the offensive tackles and why there's a lot of hype brewing, especially around guys like Charles Cross, which drives the price up. It drives the interest up around these specific guys, and I think that it's going to end up being a great situation for the Giants because you're seeing now that right tackle, the transition from these guys at left tackle to right tackle isn't the biggest of deals. They're looking really strong in their workout sessions. Making that transition in the drills they are running. So I think that's really, really exciting for the Giants and, that transition being an impact player day one. So I'm excited to talk about those guys. Before we do, Anthony, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great, and I first want to touch on Kayvon Thibodeaux and how excited I am for him as a prospect. And I love that the Giants are interested in him because I know that there were some teams that went to the NFL scouting combine and had some reservations about Kayvon Thibodeaux. They were a little turned off by maybe his demeanor, his attitude, whatever. It doesn't seem like the Giants, personally, to me, were one of those teams. It seems like their interest has been high and only gotten higher since the NFL combine in a way. So that's really exciting for me. But I also want to touch quickly on these offensive tackles before we really dive in, because I think it's very interesting to see how the big boards are kind of switching around, right? For a while, everyone just had Evan Neal as a number one offensive tackle in the draft. That was like a lock-in, but that's changed recently, right? You go over to the Draft Network, the number one ranked offensive tackle on their board is Ike Ekwonu. Number two is Evan Neal. And you go down further on the list, they're 16th ranked prospects rather than these guys both being in the top five. 16th is Charles Cross. But then you go over to Pro Football Focus, and it gets really interesting because their number one offensive tackle is Charles Cross at number 5 overall, number 6 overall, Ike Ekwonu, and number 7 overall, Evan Neal. So they're all in lockstep according to PFF. There's a gap between Cross and the other two according to the Draft Network. Pretty sure the NFL draft.com, like NFL.com, they have Evan Neal number 1. So it's really interesting to see the way that this board is shifting in this final month leading up to the draft. But I'm really excited to see exactly how that, draft day falls out, which tackles go first, and which ones do the Giants end up having their available picks to, right? Is it going to be Charles Cross? Is Evan Neal really going to slide down the board? Are teams really valuing Ike Ekwonu above him? I think it's going to be really curious to see exactly which tackle falls into the Giants' laps.
Yeah, and in conjunction with the quarterback hype and the pass rusher hype, right? So if you have the Giants at 5th overall, chances are, Aiden Hutchinson's going number 1. One or two of those offensive tackles may go. Even Kayvon Thibodeaux could go early. Sauce Gardner, the cornerbacks are a luxury pick. A lot of teams trade, take cornerbacks very early because they are you need good corners, especially with the schemes that the NFL teams are running these days. A lot of man coverage, a lot of blitz heavy stuff. You need to have good cornerbacks. Sauce Gardner projects as a really good corner, so I think he could be even a top 5 pick. A lot of people love Kyle Hamilton, obviously, and who knows, Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, maybe one of those guys, number 2, number 3 overall. I know the Detroit Lions have been mocked Malik Willis a couple times at number 2. A team might trade up to get one in the top 5. So there's always that possibility. One of those 3 guys, though, Charles Cross, Ike Ekwonu, and Evan Neal, one of those 3 guys will likely be there at number 5 for the Giants. And how important is that? And how, exciting is that for us? It's everything. It's everything for the Giants because solidifying the right tackle opposite Andrew Thomas gives Daniel Jones the chance to finally unlock his potential. It is a lot easier to solve the interior line with, plug and play guards, the Mark Lewinsky's of the world. Then, of course, John Feliciano's. There's guys who you can get, Shane Lemieux will compete at left guard. And I think that in addition to that, they will draft the guy in the mid rounds to also provide some competition. But Evan Neal had his pro day yesterday. The dude is 6'7", 330 pounds. He ran a better 40-yard dash than Ike Ekwonu, and I think he's 30 pounds heavier than him. He is one of those freak athletes, someone that you build a foundation around on the offensive line. If he was to fall because Charles Cross is higher on some guys, he's immediate upgrade as a pass protector. If Evan Neal drops to 5, you run to the podium. If Ike Ekwonu is there at 5, you run to the podium. This is the type of situation the Giants are in. They're going to have a chance to walk away with one of those 3 offensive tackles, and all 3 of those guys are being mocked top 5 or even number 1 on the board on different sites. Like Anthony said, PFF's Charles Cross, Ikem Ekwonu for the Draft Network, Evan Neal. I'm sure somebody has Evan Neal as number 1. All those guys are really good for their own reasons, and people are having really a lot of trouble defining who the number 1 guy is. So the Giants can capitalize on that, which is awesome. I'm really excited to see where they go with this and, how Kayvon Thibodeaux plays into the mix. And that leads me to that portion of this video. And Kayvon Thibodeaux, the Giants sent general manager Joe Schoen to Oregon specifically to see Kayvon Thibodeaux. I mean, like, for obvious reasons, he's going to be the top prospect on the board there. But when you look at where Joe Schoen has gone, he's gone to Ohio State, Georgia, the bigger schools. Oregon, obviously, that is the one big player that stands out as, okay, we got to be looking at this guy. And how important is that? How much does that mean? It clearly means that he impressed in the interviews during the combine. Kayvon Thibodeaux said the Giants really tested him with that big brother-like mentality, and I think that they were trying to figure out, can he handle the New York media market? We've seen the New York market just completely wear away at players, OBJ, even Landon Collins, Eli Apple's mom. So many people have been attacked and eaten alive by the media in New York. Can Kayvon Thibodeaux handle not having a sack for 5 games and handling the criticism that comes with that? The expectation. He grew up in LA, he's used to the spotlight. But I think the Giants wanted to test him in that way because, we've seen Dave Gettleman, we've seen guys, former GMs bring in players before that just couldn't handle the smoke. And I think that Kayvon Thibodeaux has the charisma to be elite and to handle it in stride and take it in stride. But his statistics don't necessarily jump off the board to a lot of people. 7 sacks last year, 12 tackles for a loss. You can look at other players in this draft class and say, hey, they may offer more. And especially when you're thinking about how deep this draft class is in pass rushers. The thing is, Kayvon Thibodeaux is an outside linebacker, right? There's pass rushers in this draft beyond belief, but some of them might not fit that outside linebacker role, Anthony. How important do you think that factor is in the Giants taking an offensive, or rather a defensive edge rusher? Do you think that outside linebacker, do you think that Wink Martindale's like, we don't care if it's defensive end, do you want that guy to be able to play the 3-4? What do you think?
I think if you take a look at what Patrick Graham did defensively, he definitely didn't care because there was a lot of multiple in there, right? The defense had a lot of 3-4 and 4-3 concepts that they were utilizing. So the pass rushers needed to be pretty versatile. But I think also if you take a look at Azeez Ojulari, we're all really excited for what he's going to do in Wink Martindale's defense. We think he's a great fit. He played a lot in a 3-point stance over at Georgia. Like, he very frequently was in that 4-3 scheme with the Georgia Bulldogs. So I don't think it's something that Wink Martindale is going to care too much about, because I think really at the end of the day, he's a good pass rusher or he's not. Kayvon Thibodeaux, Azeez Ojulari, whoever it is that's pass rushing, they're either good or they aren't, and they got to coach them to get comfortable in a 2-point stance. And we've seen NFL players go throughout their careers and make that transition, right? Like, veterans make that transition from a 4-3 to a 3-4. Khalil Mack is actually a great example of that. With the Raiders, he was playing in a 4-3. He was dominant. And then he started playing in a 3-4, or maybe it was the other way around. But either way, he made a transition from 3-4 to 4-3 or vice versa. I think Chandler Jones did that at one point in his career as well. He was playing in a very multiple Patriots defense, and then he went over to the Cardinals. I've seen a lot of, and Jamie Collins as well made that transition. And he even moved all the way to off-ball linebacker. But there's been NFL veterans that have made those transitions from 3-4 to 4-3 or vice versa. So I think if you're a good pass rusher and you have that type of athleticism and flexibility, you can pass rush from anywhere. And I do think Kayvon Thibodeaux is one of those players that can get it done from any alignment. I think Kayvon Thibodeaux's got enough power to even move in on the interior on some snaps, not consistently, but he could probably get some work done against some guards in the NFL as well, because he's a very powerful pass rusher, which, sure, you could argue his power makes him a better fit for a 4-3 defensive end, but I think that he's got enough speed to be a good enough 3-4 outside linebacker. I think he's got both abilities. I think his tools and his array of pass rushing moves, he's got it all there. He's got the ability to pass rush from a 2-point or a 3-point stance. So I'm not worried about that with Kayvon Thibodeaux. In terms of some of the other pass rushers that are on the board, maybe in the top 10 or maybe even in the second round, I think it depends, right? There are some prospects who are more versatile and you can trust them to make that transition. And I'm sure that the Giants probably look at a few of them as lockstep in a specific scheme and they're not a scheme fit. So they're just not even on the board. But that happens for every prospect at every single position. There could even be a wide receiver that's just so dominant, but they just don't fit the Giants scheme. So they won't take them. It's for every position. You want to look to see if the player's talent matches the value of your pick. And then on top of that, does the scheme match your team, right? The scheme fit. There's got to be a good scheme fit. So for every player, the Giants are going to look, how do they fit into our scheme? But for Kayvon Thibodeaux, an edge rusher particularly, who has great ability just with speed and power, I don't think it matters whether or not his career in college was more 4-3 or 3-4. He's got the tools to be a good edge rusher, and they just have to mold him into one.
Yeah, and I'd also kind of throw this into the mix. Wink Martindale's scheme, right? It's very man coverage based scheme. Usually, when you're talking about outside linebackers, especially when you're referencing Patrick Graham's system, those outside linebackers dropped into coverage a lot, right? That's kind of like one of the defining traits of an outside linebacker, especially if you're playing a heavy zone coverage scheme. They're going to drop back into coverage. But when you're playing in Wink Martindale's scheme and you're playing a lot of man, those outside linebackers aren't dropping into coverage very often. So you're expecting them to be rushing the passer like every down. So you want to have a guy like Kayvon Thibodeaux. Like, who cares if he's a good like zone coverage, linebacker? That's irrelevant when you're talking about OLBs in Wink Martindale scheme. You're looking for just pure pass rush and speed off the edge. And Kayvon Thibodeaux offers that. Like Anthony said, the combination of speed and power is unique. That is something that you can build around. He has the production to match. It's not like he's a very raw prospect. He's a super developed prospect with the right coaching. And I love the Giants hiring of Andre Patterson from the Minnesota Vikings, helped create elite pass rushers in Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin. Those two guys have had tremendous NFL careers. And Kayvon Thibodeaux with the right coaching, talking about Wink Martindale and Andre Patterson, there's a lot of potential to unlock there. And I think they're looking at that guy and saying, hey, you know what? He's got the tools day one. If we can develop him correctly, this kid could be an elite prospect. And just to point out another pairing that really makes me excited is Kayvon Thibodeaux and Azeez Ojulari. Ojulari coming off his rookie season. You could even make the assumption that the coaching improved this offseason on defense. So when you're talking about pairing two young players on cost-controlled contracts at one of the most important and financially, just like one of the most priced out positions in football, you have to overpay for them just to get a good player. You're talking about financial freedom, when you have to invest in other positions. The Giants have done a good job, so far in terms of this offseason, plugging in some offensive line pieces and getting some depth guys with the money they do have. The fact that they're positive right now is a miracle. I think they're like 1.6 million above the cap, which is insane considering we didn't have to restructure any big players in terms of the Leonard Williams of the world, or even the James Bradburys. We managed to restructure Sterling Shepard and Blake Martinez and still keep the players, which is an absolute genius move by Joe Schoen. So I'm excited to see what they do in the draft to really go after these specific positions that can be costly. And, that type of investment in the draft capital, at positions that ultimately end up you have to overspend to solidify down the line. That is where you go. So that leads us to another conversation that I don't want to have today, but it leads you to next year. You have Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeaux at pass rush. You have Andrew Thomas and a young right tackle, and then you get the quarterback, on a rookie contract. Now you have 5 of the most expensive positions in football on cost-controlled contracts. That is how you properly rebuild. That is what I expect the Giants to do. So Anthony, I'll ask you this: how did that just sound? 5 of the most expensive positions solidified, cost controlled. That's the dream.
That is a dream. I mean, that sounds beautiful to me. That is the dream scenario. That's what the Giants should strive to do. You want to build your team in a way that doesn't break the bank. The Giants didn't do that in recent years with Dave Gettleman. They broke the bank. They spent, really big contracts in free agency. They also took players from, interior defensive line and running back in the first round, which is not cost controlled, right? That's not effective in terms of spending your money properly, because you're spending a lot of money on rookie contracts for players that second market, they're not supposed to get contracts, maybe even as big as their first contracts that they got on the rookie deal. So that's like a key difference for the Giants right now, is if they want to build this team opposite of what Dave Gettleman did, they will value higher priced positions earlier on in the draft, because second contracts are what bogs down a team. I mean, even look at the Chiefs, right? They gave Patrick Mahomes that contract. They had to dump off Tyreek Hill. There's, of course, they got their quarterback solidified, but they had to get rid of their superstar receiver. And even the Packers, they signed Aaron Rodgers to that extension, had to let Devontae Adams go, because especially as the wide receiver market is just ballooning right now, those contracts are skyrocketing. So I think that's really important. It's a point that I made in yesterday's video when I was discussing the dream scenario with the edge rusher and offensive tackle duo of Evan Neal and Kayvon Thibodeaux in the first round of the draft. I mentioned that both of those positions are very expensive. Teron Armstead just got a huge contract in free agency with the Miami Dolphins. And then if you look at edge rusher, look at the contract that Max Crosby just got, right? Edge rushers are really expensive. Offensive tackles are really expensive. And you're not going to be able to get a good offensive tackle on the secondary market without spending an extreme amount of money in free agency, like the Miami Dolphins did with Teron Armstead. They had to break the bank to get that offensive tackle through free agency. You want to get those tackles through the draft and then develop them into players on second contracts. And of course, you're mentioning the quarterback position. That's huge because if you look at the most recent Super Bowl winners, obviously not this year, but in years past, a lot of them have been quarterbacks on rookie contracts. Patrick Mahomes, of course, won his Super Bowl when he was on a rookie contract. And Joe Burrow made it this year, and he was on a rookie contract because the team is able to be built at a much more efficient rate because you're not spending all of your money on the quarterback position because the quarterback is so freaking expensive. And that's been my argument for not picking up Daniel Jones' fifth-year option and even saying that even if he looks good this year, they should still probably move on, right? Even if he has a great year, what if he reverts back to normalcy? What if he just has a phenomenal year this season, but then the following years, he looks like the same Daniel Jones from the past 3 years, right? Well, then you're screwed and you're overpaying a player who's not worth that contract. And that's why for the Giants, he never really showed up. He never really clicked and showed all of that potential. So it might be best for the Giants to just move on or reset their rookie quarterback window and give themselves another 4 years of cheap quarterback play. And hopefully it's really good, cheap quarterback play with a first round prospect that they draft. That's the way that I see it. That's why I have a lot of uncertainty in Daniel Jones's future. Like, of course, I want him to succeed and be the guy. I want that for every Giants player. But if you're taking a look at the contracts, the way they're structured, and what comes next for Daniel Jones, you're probably going to have to come to the conclusion that they can't afford to pay him without really knowing who he is. And can they really know if he just has one decent year in Brian Daboll's scheme? Probably not. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Daniel Jones. And of course, keeping everybody on those cheap contracts. And like you mentioned, Alex, the way that you build a championship roster in the modern NFL, you get a really good quarterback on a rookie deal, and you get a lot of other cheap players that are really good at other positions as well. But of course, once you have that quarterback that's really good on a cheap deal, that's when you can start spending in free agency at other positions. It gives you so much flexibility because you're not spending 30% of your salary cap on just the quarterback position. It's a fraction of the cost. So I think that's huge. I really like that you mentioned that. I think it's a great point to bring up in the discussion. I think it's something that Giants fans, and ourselves included, probably didn't bring up as much in the past drafts, under Dave Gettleman. We didn't think about this as much, but I think it's really important to think about now, drafting players at positions that are expensive on the secondary market so that you can get the best bang for your buck.
Yeah, I mean, look, Dave Gettleman spent money when we didn't have a quarterback. He spent money when we were in a terrible position with multiple spots that need to be cost controlled, just with massive voids there. And he tried to overspend to plug them. And when you do that, if it doesn't work out, it hinders the team's ability to do anything financially for years. And it puts you in a tough position. We're still paying Nate Solder. We're still paying Golden Tate. Like it's tough to work away from that. And Joe Shane has signed many 1-year deals just to get away from all that. It's going to take a year, build the foundation, lay the wood floor, and then build up and build the walls and everything. And I think the quarterback next year, if they do go with that route and draft a rookie, and they have a pass rusher, but again, it comes down to coaching. It always comes down to coaching. The players have all the talent, and Joe Shane said it. You usually don't miss on the player, you miss on the person. But I think ultimately we've seen poor coaching from the Giants for years, especially on the offensive side. And it's really hurt them. Like it's hurt their development. And the defense has also suffered because of that. They've had to stay on the field. They've been more exposed to injury. But that kind of wraps up, our points. And I think that you guys kind of get the idea of why it's so important to lock in elite talents like a pass rusher and an offensive tackle. And the Giants have a chance to do that. So I'm really excited to see what they do. Draft is quickly approaching. It's going to be super, super exciting. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe as always, my friends. Have an awesome rest of your weekend, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Giants episode.